computer. Right. Okay. So let me just start the slideshow. Okay, so my name's Kevin Flood, and this is a virtual tour done for London Walks. And it's the second of my Jane Austen virtual tours. And the first one I did at Christmas, which was Jane Austen at Christmas, which is based on my Jane Austen and Sense and Sensibility. So that's like kind of like the first part, and this is like my second part of my Jane Austen's exploration of London. So we're not going to start with Sense and Sensibility. Um, I will mention it, and it will come up, and we'll get to it more towards the end of the program because I want to concentrate more on the rest of London. Some people went to the first Jane Austen, and so we're going to, as I said, we're going to look at London in 1809. Right, so you'll see at the bottom. Sorry, let's start. So a lot of the pictures are my own, or from Wikipedia or from copyright-free sources, but one or two may not be. Sometimes it's impossible to find, and normally you've got the right to use slides for lectures. And as I'm a lecturer, I'm assuming I've got fair use rights to use something for a lecture, but I haven't got the right to let you then copy it from me. So if you want a copy of a picture, just let me know, and I'll either give you a copy of the picture or I'll tell you where you can get a copy of the picture. Um, so if you could not download a screenshot or record, it would then mean I won't be breaching copyright, I hope. Anyway, so where did this start? This particular tour started with the gift that you can see on the right. This is a copy of a publication of 1809 called A Picture of London. And as we know, Jane Austen was coming to London from the late 18th century through to just before her death in around about 1815, 1816. And she came to London a few times to stay with her brother. So she would have been coming to London and she would be seeing London with the view of somebody who didn't know it well and would be exploring it because feel sure she was that sort of person. So this book was published in 1809, and it came into my hands from a slightly strange way. I got an email from Anna Gronow, and she said she's found this book, that book, and it had a post-it note on it, and on that post-it note, it mentioned my name. And when she spoke to her mother said she went to a lecture that I gave at the Old Operating Theatre Museum when I was the director of the Old Operating Theatre Museum in London. It's a wonderful museum, by the way, in 1994, and she really enjoyed my talk, and she wanted me to have the book. And so this is the book she gave me. As soon as I got it, I took it to around the corner. I was lucky enough to live near to a book binders, and they bound the book, and I've got the little book here. And I thought, yeah. So what I did was I put on a free virtual tour during COVID, I think it was, and to thank her for giving back. I gave a tour using the book, and she and her relatives joined in as a celebration of Alice Grunow from Canada, who died. And this is her. So I'd like to thank her and her family very much. It's a really great book, and it's a really interesting book to have, and that's what we're going to be looking at. This is the bound version of it. It's it's really portable. It's a bit thick for your pocket, but as long as you haven't got tight pockets, it would fit in an overcoat pocket or a jacket pocket. And it's incredibly practical, as you see. So this is it, the picture of London for 1809. It's being a correct guide. And it's got two large maps in it, which we'll see. This is the 10th edition, so that presumably it began as the Picture of London 1798. And it's printed by Richard Phillips, it's printed by someone from Paternoster Row, which is just near St Paul's Cathedral, which from Shakespeare's time to the 19th century was the main publication area and booksellers area of London. Although by the 18th century, a lot of the classy book publishers moved out to the West End, and you can see the person who's the publisher is Richard Phillips here. So Phillips of Bridge Street, which is by Westminster Bridge, I believe, was involved with the printing of it. And you can see a picture of the British Museum over to the left. That's what that slightly out of focus picture is over there. And this is the fold out map. We'll be seeing maps like this, but so this gives you a view of London round about 1800. I'm not entirely sure when the map was done, but it's about this time. You can see the meandering of the River Thames. You've got East London over here. You've got I'm up here somewhere, just up here. Just been developed at this time in Hackney. And then you've got Paddington over here. You've got that's Oxford Street. This is Piccadilly. This is the Strand and Fleet Street. The City of London is this area here. That's the Tower of London. That's St Paul's Cathedral. That's Westminster Abbey just down here. This is Westminster Bridge. You see, there's only three bridges. There's London Bridge, the first one. Then there's Westminster Bridge, the second one, built in 1750. And then the third one is Blackfriars Bridge, which has only just been built at the end of the 18th century. And partly with the help of oh God's name's just slipped from my mind, but the person who wrote The Rights of Man and helped out with the American Revolution, and who loved iron bridges and tried to develop iron bridges. Anyway, so that's the map, and here you've got the parks. You've got Hyde Park at the top here, and you've got St James's Park there and Green Park, and this is where Jane Austen's brother lived about here. And she would have come in on this road and stayed in a hotel just here in Piccadilly. But she normally would then go and stay with her brother, who lived just here in Berkeley Street, and then later on he moved further down here, and he lived in Covent Garden over here for a while, and he lived in Kensington, Chelsea. Down here for a while. So, but this is where she came in from, where she lived in Hampshire. So Mayfair was the area that she knew best, I imagine. That's where her brother lived. And the book has got not only has it got a map, but you'll see the map is gridded. You can see the little numbers on top. And so there's a list of streets, and you can just go to C2, and that's where the Adelphi is. And this is the thing that I find most fascinating about looking at old guidebooks. It's telling you all sorts of things. It's telling you the houses in London, they've got lead pipes. There's such quantity. They're got a lavish supply of water. Nothing could be more commodious or cleanly than the interior of the houses. And this character extends generally to lodging houses, taverns, coffee houses, and other places. Totally the opposite of what listening to Dickens writing 20, 30, 40 years later would give you an idea of London. London is clean and commodious, according to the guidebook. The population was expanding very rapidly at this time, so it may represent the difference between a crowded and an overcrowded city. But anyway, the direction of this is also very, very interesting. Now, I would never describe London in this way, but they do. It's very interesting. There are two grand lines of streets from west to east. One of them, which may be called the northern route, is that what it says? The more northern one commences from Uxbridge Road at the north side of Hyde Park, and under the successive names of Oxford Street, St Giles, Holborn, Skinner Street, Newgate Street, Cheapside, Cornhill, Leadenhall Street is continued on to Whitechapel and Mile End on the Essex Road to Colchester, which we would now call the East End. The southern line commences on the Bath Road at the south side of Hyde Park and is continued under the successive names of Piccadilly, St James's Street, Pall Mall, Charing Cross, Strand, Fleet Street, Ludgate Hill, St Paul's Churchyard, Watling Street, Cannon Street, Tower Street to the Tower of London, whence it may be said to be further extended for 2 miles along the river side to Wapping. Now, this describes London as being on those two streets. And later on, it tells you that being on those two streets means it's easy to find its way about. And it describes those two streets as being amazing. And here you can see those two streets. This is the upper one, Oxford Street, going along here. And through into Holborn and down past St Paul's into Cheapside and along Cornhill and out to Wapping, to Whitechapel, and out to Essex and to Colchester, what I would call the Colchester Road, Roman Road. And the other one comes in here, Bath Street on the south side of Hyde Park. Sorry, Hyde Park's here. I was saying it was up there. Hyde Park's here. And that's a Serpentine there. And then it goes along here on the Piccadilly to Oxford Circus to Leicester Square, and then it goes down to the Strand along Fleet Street, and then it takes this lower road here and comes along here and through Cannon Street and to the Tower of London, and then can be said to go through Wapping. So I would never describe London in that way. I would talk about the City of London, which is this area here, then Southwark being the first suburb over here, then Westminster being the next suburb over here, though suburb's probably the wrong word, and then the connecting road of Fleet Street and the Strand, and then the London filling out with the expansion into the east, the expansion along the coast, the riverside down here into Rotherhithe, and the expansion along to through Lambeth to Lambeth, and then the expansion to Westminster, and then the infilling in Mayfair up here. That's how I would describe it. But this author describes it on the basis of these two roads. And for him, they're two continuous roads of absolutely amazing shops and utilities and entertainments and museums and galleries and circuses and theatres and shops and stalls and all sorts of things. They're on those two roads. So that's a big difference to the way we view it. The book also gives you a rather good map. Well, it's not a great map in contemporary terms, but it gives you a map showing you the City of London, and then you've got the River Thames meandering all the way here to Windsor. That's Windsor Great Park, and Farnham is just about here. And Jane Austen lived just off the map here, at Basingstoke, and then later on near Alton. At Steventon, where she was born, near Basingstoke, and Alton, which is near Chaunton, where she moved after she and her family, her mother and her sister, left Bath. Now, it goes on about the environs, and again, it describes it in a completely different way to the way I would. And it basically says here that there's an amphitheatre where the metropolis forms on the north side of the Thames, nobly rising above the banks of that river. So this amphitheatre is basically, as far as I can tell, is the hills at King's Cross and Islington. Then it says there's another amphitheatre beyond that, which is the hills of Hampstead and Highgate and Muswell Hill. It says that here. On the east and west are extensive plains stretching in either way along the banks of the Thames. Further, one of the most fertile valleys on the surface of the earth, forming one of the most fertile valleys on the surface of the earth, while on the south the landscape is beautifully varied from west to east by the high ground of Richmond, Wimbledon, Epsom, Norwood and Blackheath, terminating in the horizon by Leith Hill, Box Hill, the Reigate Hills, the Wroxham Hills, and Shooters Hill. So these are hills that go right into Surrey, which are the surroundings. And it talks about villages, vegetables, and all the wonderful things that have been grown, and they're manufacturing, commercing, and they're all feeding into the city. So instead of this idea, this huge metropolis, you've got this idea of the beautiful area around, which is also feeding in a much more healthy way into a city that is big but not huge. Now, in the map, he gives you this Actually, I think it's quite a strange map and slightly useless, but it gives you a map of all the main attractions. So it's worth it. The trouble is, it's slightly difficult to read because it's difficult to take a photograph of a big flappy bit of paper, and it's slightly out of focus. So I'm just trying to find my version of it, which is actually difficult to do because they're very, very well folded in the maps so that I can actually read it rather than not read it. But I just want to spend a little bit of time on it. No, that's not it either. Sorry, there's more maps than you'd think. There's three or four maps, but then there's about another three fold-ins. And if I can't find it in a minute, I'm just going to try and read what I can see now. No, I'm not going to be able to find it. Anyway, so this fold out. So basically, it's got Queen's Palace. St James's, the Queen's Palace is what we would now call Buckingham Palace, but Buckingham Palace hadn't been built by then, so it belonged to the Queen. The Queen's Palace, St James's Palace, Westminster Abbey, Westminster Hall, Westminster Bridge, Astley's Amphitheatre, which is down here by Westminster, on the other side of Westminster. It's a big circusy type amphitheatre. Then the Asylum, which I think is now occupied by the Imperial War Museum, which used to be where Bedlam moved to at some point. Then you've got the Royal Circus. You've got the Royal Institution, which is back over here, which is where Faraday and Humphrey Davy hung out and did their scientific experiments. You've got the Opera House, the Theatre Haymarket, which Jane Austen went to and saw a play, which is the play that's in Mansfield Park. Then you've got the I can't read the first word. Exhibition. You've got the panorama. We'll see those later on. The Society of Arts, which is now the Royal Society of Arts. The Theatre Covent Garden. The British Museum. The Russell Institution. The Foundling Hospital, which is an orphan home for orphans, foundlings, Drury Lane Theatre, the Exeter Exchange, which was a really big marketplace, which also had a waxworks and a zoo in it. And one occasion, the elephant went wild and they had to rather cruelly shoot it. They've got the Lyceum Theatre, Somerset House, which was a palace, and later on part of the University of London, and also where Charles Dickens' father worked. A panorama on the Strand, the Olympic Pavilion, Surgeons' Hall, Temple Gardens, Blackfriars Bridge, because it was a modern wonder, Surrey Institution, St Paul's Cathedral, Charterhouse School and Medieval Monastery, the London Institution, which is kind of an educational institution, Mansion House, Lord Mayor lives, Royal Exchange, which is the business exchange of London, Bethlehem Hospital, which is up here somewhere, which is where mental patients were treated, although by this time they're about to move down to where the Imperial War Museum has now taken over. And then you've got East India House, which is in this area here, the Tower of London, which is over here. Then you've got London Docks, which is one of the wonders of the world in 1809. And then the last one, I can't read it, it's the London something or other. So you can see the wonders all laid out there so you can go and find them, although it doesn't really help you find them. It's got a couple of fold outs which give you plans of places you might like to go and visit. I mean, this is actually quite, I could have done with this with my Charles I. That's where Guy Fawkes was burnt at the stake. Yeah, I could have done with that yesterday, Saturday on my walk. And you can see the Westminster Abbey is here, and then you've got the House of Commons, Westminster Hall, the King's Bench, um, Court here, House of Lords over here, House of Commons in St Stephen's Chapel there, and St Margaret's Church, which was the church of the House of Commons. It's got amazingly useful things like the distances of principal places from each other. So if you wanted to go from Clerkenwell Green and you were going to go to the Piccadilly Haymarket, you just look down the Clerkenwell Green grid until you get to the Piccadilly Haymarket, and it tells you it's 2 miles and no furlongs. And it tells you here that a furlong is an eighth of a mile. Now, everyone at if they're my age, everyone knows. Well, I used to know that, but it's an eighth of a mile. So you've got it in everything's in miles and furlongs. which is interesting. So these are the places they think you might be wanting to go. So that's very useful. And then how much does it cost you to get there? Well, this was even more fantastic. So if I want to go from Charing Cross to Ranelagh, which is in Chelsea, so that is going to cost me 2 shillings and sixpence, which is quite a lot of money in those days. And so this tells you how much you have to pay. But bear in mind, the coachman can either charge you for time or for distance. So, and what they do now is a bit of both. So when you get in a black cab, they're A, charging you for distance, and B, charging you for money. And there's some sort of algorithm which determines how it all goes. Now you might want to go by boat, because going by boat was very, very popular. And so you can either, if you look down here, you can go from London Bridge to Deptford for 2 shillings, or from London Bridge to Shadwell is, if you get rowed with someone rowing 2 oars, or if you have someone sculling with that oar at the back and sculling backwards and forwards with the scull. Sorry, when I'm sitting down to read these things, so you can't see me. Sorry about that. Just realised that. Anyway, so it's really, really useful. So it gives you these rates of Waterman, the rates of travel. It also has got one, by the way, of sedan chairs as well. Um, this is, I think, this is fabulously funny. This next bit. Um, there is scarcely any material point in the earlier part of the history of London that is not involved in some degree of obscurity. So he's basically saying that the origin of the town, the etymology of its name, the founding of its walls, their course and their extent, even its original site, have all furnished antiquarians with fruitful topics of discussion. So basically, he's just basically saying we can only conjecture, and these are conjectures, and we're probably as right as anybody else. And he says at the bottom, London appears to have been founded in times prior to the invasion of Julius Caesar by the inhabitants of Britain, descended from the Goths who had emigrated from Scandinavia. Now, you can tell that is no longer thought to be at all true. And so there were reasons why they thought that, but the Julius Caesar part is we now think it's founded by the Romans, but not by Julius Caesar in the reign of Caligula, of Caesar, of Claudius. Caligula tried to invade but didn't manage. But anyway, Claudius founded it. So, and this idea of it being founded before Caesar by the Goths is something that didn't have currency for very, very long. So out of date information, which happens to all guides books. And here you can see um, how much people are earning. So when we're talking about 2 shillings for a cab to take you somewhere, well, a labourer earns 2 shillings. Now, if you think a labourer nowadays, you'd be lucky to get a labourer on a day rate for less than £100. That means a taxi fare is £100. And then, I mean, of course, you can work out money, compare it to today by various means, but I always think the most meaningful is by comparing it to wages. But the problem was working class wages were really low, so it's not really comparable because the labourers were paid much less in real terms. But I still think it's useful to know that if that labourer wanted to get a cab, he'd have to pay his whole day's fee for the cab. So, like, if I was to go from my house to King's Cross, that would cost me £25 by cab, by Uber. And I would, if I do a guided walk if I do a day's work, I would probably get £150. So you can see, anyway, they were paid very badly. A vicar might earn 15 shillings a day, and the vicar I'm thinking of is Jane Austen's father, and we know he was paid about £200 to be a vicar, but he also ran a school. And he also did farming, and he also ran 3 churches. So he was actually probably taking home about £600, which was like a good middle class salary. So £600 is a good middle class salary. And if you work out, if it was £1 a day, he might be earning £5 a week. And if he was earning £5 a week, he might be paying £20 a month, and 20 times 10 is so is only something like 250, exactly what a vicar earns, as I said. Anyway, so I was working that out from two different directions. They come to about the same amount. Anyway, I won't let you. We won't dwell upon this, but you can see it's got different wages. So farm labourers um, are 17 to 18 pounds, and surveyors earning 100 times more, almost. Um, a policeman earning double, printing trade persons earning 4 times, the clergyman's were 5 times as much. Anyway, it just gives you an idea of the relative values of people. Um, Now, I've already sort of said this, but just I've left one of them out actually. But anyway, I'm doing Jane Austen's Bath on Monday, the 10th of February, and I'm Chaucer's Canterbury Virgil Pilgrimage on the 18th of April, and I'm also doing Civil War on Thursday, January the 30th. Now, I'm just going to take a slight pause here to just tell you some books you might want to get. This is more a pamphlet than a book, but it's incredibly useful. It's by Louise Allen, and it gives you a really good tour of the places where Jane Austen habituated when she came to London, where she went shopping, and it's very, very good about the West. Well, it's good about London in general, but it was specifically good about Mayfair and Westminster. And it's not very expensive, and I'm sure you can get second-hand copies on Abbey Books. So that's the book I would recommend if you're particularly interested in Jane Austen's London. Louise Allen, A Tour Guide for the Modern Traveller. Now, Jane Austen, what did she look like? Well, she looked like that, left and right. The two, they're both Jane Austen. This is Jane Austen, and this is by Cassandra, her sister. And this is Jane Austen's back, which is also by Cassandra, her sister. So Cassandra's not a professional painter, so she's just a talented amateur, and she's sketched her sister, and that's the only authentic picture we have of her. Recently, this book has been proposed as being Jane Austen. I don't think it's universally accepted. And the question is, are these two the same people? This one's this is a softer version of Jane Austen. And this one, I mean, you can imagine this person here being a very good academic. But whether it is her or not, I'll leave you to investigate. But that's what Jane Austen looked like. Where did she live? Well, we're up here in London, and she came from all but Basingstoke here. She used to dance in Basingstoke, and Steventon is not far from Basingstoke. And then she lived in Bath, and then when her father died, she had nowhere to live with her mother and her sister, so they went round relatives and brothers' houses. And then eventually one of her rich brothers gave her a property in Chaunton, which is near Alton. So you can see Farnham is here. So at Chaunton, that's where she spent the rest of her life. Most of her books she began here, and she finished most of them. And she wrote some new ones when she lived in the peaceful tranquility of Chaunton village. Um, we may have some more pictures of those at the back end if we have time. But this is the view we had before. This is London. You can see the docks of London here. Um, and West Indies docks just been built. So this is 1809. Those docks were built in 1804 and 1805. That's the West Indies docks. These are the East Indies docks. And people said, if you really want to see the magnitude of the wonder of London, don't bother with the city, go and see the docks. So these docks were just like the most amazing things the world had ever seen. Um, and that's the City of London. Then you've got the West End and the governmental area of London down here in Westminster. Then you've got the River Thames going through to Chelsea, Battersea, Fulham, Barnes towards Westminster. And I said Jane Austen lived over that way, so she'd be coming in on probably on this road here, and then getting off at Piccadilly just here. Although she may have come in on the northern road and then dropped down to Piccadilly. Um, and you can see just, I know you want to know where I live. I used to live in Clapton up here, and then I moved down here to Hackney, which is there, and I live just about there. You can see it's hardly built up at all in Jane Austen's day. And that takes me straight down the Great North Road to Bishopsgate. Um, I mentioned Chawton, as I said, I'd like to say more about Jane Austen's life, but we won't have time to do London, and come back on one of my other Jane Austen tours, and then you'll hear more about that. But this is Chaunton, which is now a museum dedicated to her, and this was found for her, her mother, and her sister, Cassandra, um, after her father died. It's an interesting story. But what happened was when the father died, they lost his income. And so they were struggling for a while, and it took, I think, 2, if not 3 years for anyone to find them a house. Now, the thing that's a mystery about it is the fact that let's go through her brothers. So they're in poverty, homeless, 2 maiden sisters and their mother, widowed mother. And this is where she did her writing on this little table, on a little writing box. And sorry, I thought I had another picture there. But so what I was saying was what happened was eventually her rich brother found them this house to live in. Now the question is, why didn't he find it earlier? And it's an interesting possibility because what happened was her rich brother Edward, his wife had 14 babies, and she died, I think, on the 14th or after the 14th. She died in childbirth, and after that, he was able to find his mother and the 2 sisters, his 2 sisters, a lovely house to live in. Now, he had 2 stately homes, one just round the corner from this house here. And surely to God, he could have found them a house, a room. Stately homes have got, 40, 50 bedrooms. If they've got lodges, they've got stable blocks with quarters above them. They've got any number of farms and cottages that are owned by the estate around and in and around the estate. But he didn't find anything until his wife had died. And that is, we don't know why, but one suspects it's either because his wife didn't want her mother-in-law and sister-in-laws living with her, or he realized that he needed his mother and his 2 sisters living with him now that he had to look after 14 children on his own. We don't know, but it's a bit like the plot of Sense and Sensibility. That's the main point I want to make. Now, Jane Austen was always thinking about her right. Any good writers do. You're thinking about it all the time. Just in case I don't say it later on, she said in one of her letters that she was visiting an art gallery, and she said she was looking for, or she felt sure she would find Elizabeth Bennet there, and when she found her, she'd be wearing a yellow dress. Here she says to her sister, I'm never too busy to think of Sense and Sensibility. I can no more forget it than a mother can forget her suckling child. Now, briefly, this is Sense and Sensibility land. So Jane Austen comes in on here on the carriage, gets off, stays in a little hotel here sometimes, at least once, called the Bath Hotel near the White Horse Coaching Inn. And then a brother lives up here in Berkeley Street, which is somewhere up here. I'm not going to look for it, but it's in this area here. This is Berkeley Square, so it's off Berkeley Square. It's around about here. And This is Grosvenor Square over here. This is Hyde Park here. This is Green Park down here. You'll see there's a basin of here, and this is where Duchess of Devonshire used to live, just here, and Lord Palmerston will live here in a few years' time. Anyway, so let's go through these flags. Who are these flags? That's where Edward Ferrars is. So in Sense and Sensibility, they're all in the countryside, and mostly in Devon, and then they all come to London by coincidence. Well, everyone came to London who had any money, and they basically this is where they all stay when they're in London. So Edward Ferrars is staying in Pall Mall. Captain Colonel Brandon, I've just demoted him. Colonel Brandon is staying in St James's Street down here. Willoughby, the dastardly Willoughby, is in Bond Street here. The Middletons, married to the daughter of Mrs. Jennings, live in Conduit Street. The Palmers, with a dreadful dull wife, according to the author of the book, um, lives in that square there. The Dashwoods are staying up here in Harley Street. Mrs. Jennings, who's brought Eleanor and Marianne into London, is living in Portman Square, just off Portman Square here, which is near where Selfridges is about here. And then this is where I mean, one thinks of her as a frightful woman, but we don't really get to know her very well. That's where the mother of Edward Ferrars live, and as you know, the plot resides around Willoughby standing up Marianne, who goes into a complete state of hysteria, um, which ruins their shopping in the area, and eventually marries Colonel Brandon. And Edward Ferrars can't marry Eleanor, who loves him and he loves her, because he's stupidly promised Lucy Steele, who lives over here in unfashionable Holborn. How could she? She's just a gold digger. And she is marrying Edward, but Edward doesn't want to marry her, but he won't break his promise, even though his mum said, if you marry that woman, I'm not going to give you any money. I'm disinheriting you. She disinherits here a sum, and Lucy Steele repays his um, honesty and staying power by thinking, oh, I don't want to marry him. He's got no money. So she switches her affections to his brother, who's now inherited all the money. So that's the story of Sense and Sensibility. I hope I haven't ruined it for you. But I'm sure you've seen the film. And that's where they all live. Um, Jane Austen, this is a pound note version of the Cassandra portrait, which is on the £10 note at the moment. And this is, I mean, I can't remember what website I got this off, but there's one of those ones where they show you pictures of what they looked like then and what we think they would have looked like now. So this is somebody's photoshopped or AI'd version of what Jane Austen would have looked like if she took on contemporary fashions. These are her brothers and sisters. So, father's a vicar, mother's from a wealthy family. It's called Cassandra Lee. And older brother is James and becomes a vicar and takes over from his father. Then there's George, who is handicapped in some way because they're farming off to somebody else to look after him. Then there's Edward, who ends up a very rich man by inheritance. And then there's a favourite brother, Henry, who becomes a banker and then later on a curate. And then there's Cassandra, her lovely older sister. And then Francis, I hope I've got in the right order. Francis, who becomes a vice admiral in the Navy. Henry, by the way, began life as a militia officer in the army, then became a banker, then became a curate. And the youngest brother became a vice admiral. So she's got two sailor brothers like Captain Wentworth. She's got one army brother like Wickham, and she's got two brothers who worked in um, the church, like Edmund and Edward. Edmund in Mansfield Park and Edward in Sensibility. And she's got a rich brother like, well, let's go for one rich person in Jane Austen, Darcy. This is the silhouette which shows Jane Austen's dad presenting his third son to distant relatives, the Knights, who are sitting down here in their gorgeous richness, with two stately homes, and they adopt Edward because he's already got too many sons. So, and he changes his name, and he becomes the owner of two wealthy stately homes. That's so two of their children were kind of not at home. One because he was handicapped and they thought it better for him to be brought up somewhere else, and one because they could give him a better life. They were very good parents, I'm sure. And one of the reasons we can say they're very good parents is because none of the children died. And at this time, something like 10% of children, I've just plucked that number out of the air, by the way, but a large number of people died in their first 5 years at this time. So having 8 children, all of whom survived childhood, is quite a feat. And most of them lived on into the 60s, 70s, and 80s, apart from Jane, who died at 42. This is the stately home, one of the two stately homes owned by her brother Edward, and the house Chawton is just about 100 yards to the left of us, behind us here. And if you can see what I mean by how many, he had all these. How did come it took him so long to find his mum and two sisters somewhere to live? I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, we don't know what happened, but it just seems to me, it seems to be very similar to what happened in Sense and Sensibility. Um, what was I saying? I was saying I was going to take a little pause to see what people had said. So Melanie said hello from West Somerset. Helena said, hello, I'm in London too, and the weather is terrible. Sue's from West Sussex. Linda's from Cheshire. Mary Ann's from Boston, Massachusetts, where it's very cold and windy. And Andrea is also from London. So thank you for that. That's good to know. Um, what's the time? Yeah, let's have a. But I just stopped, paused my thought there. Let's just take a couple of minutes break there. So, and I mean sort of a couple of minutes. So what I'll do is I will just go and get a glass of water, and then I'll come back. And I'll sort of start again slowly. And if you've got any questions so far, just put it in the chat, and I'll answer those before we start going again. So if you want to put the kettle on, I think it depends how big your house is, of course. I'll might go do that myself. So 2 or 3 minutes. So while I'm waiting to restart, I just wouldn't should have put an advert on it, but I'll send you the link. So when I keep a blog. It's called the Almanac of the Past, and I try and post. I'm trying to create an almanac um, which deals with history, important dates, events, folklore, weather, saints' days, days of goddesses, festivals, and basically the way people went through the year, the times they used, the calendars they used, the ways they worked out what the time was, what the time of year was, and anything to do with the calendar and months and years, aeons and epochs, and the way the Romans organized the year, the way the French Revolution organized the years, anything like that. And it's like a big potpourri of history, folklore, a bit of science, a bit of nature, gardening, and saws about, how to get rid of slugs. I mean, not modern ways of doing it, but 16th, 17th century ways of doing it. And I kind of try and keep that up, and I'll send you a link to it, and you can subscribe, and then you'll get a post every time I send a post. Um, I do deal with Jane Austen a bit in there, um, whenever I can, in fact. But so that's something you might be interested in. I generally send a follow-up email, um, which I will send hopefully tomorrow, but sometimes I get um, anyway within a week, hopefully. But maybe hopefully I'll send it to you tomorrow, but maybe the day after tomorrow, and that will a remind you of the fact if you want to listen to the later parts of it, it's being recorded, and I can send you a recording of it. Or I can actually send you the last time I did this, what slightly younger me, um, and um, and I'll probably send you a reminder of the other virtual tours I'm gonna do. So that's where we're going. So the almanac. I'll be delighted if you would join it. And again, also any feedback you've got, do let me know. Send us an email. Um, right, okay. So let's continue with the book. So this tells now the population basically. This is them working out the population, and without going into the huge details of it, it suggests that there are 75,000 people in the city of London. It's interesting to know that the population has dropped from 139,000, or is it 159,000, to 78,000, and that was happening in the city. So the city was becoming much more a business quarter, and all the ordinary people were moving out into the East End. So basically, that's the middle of the move from London, from being where the people lived, to the City of London being where the bankers and the stockbrokers lived, and it's halfway through its route. And then it tells you the suburbs and the liberties, and all the different areas of London where they're distributed. But as you can see, the city's now only got they've come to the conclusion that the population is 837,000, nearly nine. Well, I would always say a million by 1800. People tend to think it was 500,000 in 1700 and about 900,000 in 100,000 in 1900, 1800, sorry. Am I right? Let's just go back. Sure, I'm right. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. But they think 900,000. It says here the metropolis contains 900,000 people. But he then goes on to say London is so full of business people that it might be double that number. Where does it say that? It says it somewhere. Yeah, I'll have a look. Anyway, he then says there's lots of people from abroad, which I'm sure we'll see in a moment. This is so we're now going to start our walk around, and we're going to start not at the West End, which I normally do it. I'm doing it from the centre to get to the other bits that I don't normally get to. And this is the Royal Exchange. This is Bank. It's known as Bank. We're the Bank of England. That's the Bank of England. This is the Royal Exchange. This is the Mansion House where the Lord Mayor of London lives. It's right at the heart of London, the City of London, which is increasingly becoming by this time the bankers, stockbrokers' place. So coming out of Bank Underground Station, and this is what you see. You've got eight roads, well, about eight roads meeting here. And the reason for that is this is where the River Walbrook used to flow in the Roman period. This is where the bridge was built. So all the roads led to the bridge. Um, and they also come from the gates. And I won't go through all the roads coming from the gates, but basically this is one of the great crossroads in world history. Bank history the Bank of London over here to the left, which was founded in the late 17th century, but became one of the most important aspects of British imperial dominance. The reason was because our rivals, the French, who were more powerful than us in the 17th century, the problem with them was they were bankrupt. And our kings, the reason Charles I basically had to go was that he was bankrupt, and didn't know how to run his finances, or couldn't run his finances. I'm not necessarily blaming him, but that was the problem. But what happened was that the Bank of England was founded, and you could then fight wars by pay. The future could pay for your wars because there was this thing called the national debt, and that was held in the Bank of England over here. That's the Royal Exchange, which I'll have a look at in a moment. And this is where the stock exchange was set up in this area here. And this is Mary Walnut. I got too many pictures of this area. That's the Mansion House where the Lord Mayor of London lives. He's an honorary peer of the realm, so he's equal to a lord in the House of Lords, one of the aristocrats. And that's what the building looked like. One of the first great neoclassical buildings of the 18th century. Um, and you can see London at this time was mostly red brick buildings. The Great Fire of London destroyed all the timber building, most of the timber buildings, and they replaced it by relatively plain but symmetrical Renaissance style red brick buildings, which were 4 to 7 stories high, of the type that you can see here. By the 18th century, they started, to some extent before, the counting house type building was augmented by churches from the medieval period onwards, obviously, but also by big buildings like this, which adopted this new classical style. It was kind of, I always think of it as being a belief that a lot of these buildings were banks, and you want to make your institution look like it's been there since Julius Caesar. And there's this, even though there's stocks and shares, which is a bit like gambling, or people used to think was a bit like gambling, but they wanted to be seen to be the backbone of society, so they made their buildings seem really grand, like you can see here. So the London used to be that amalgam, and then now it looks like this. You've got the 18th century buildings still here, and next to it, those red brick counting houses have been replaced by what in London is called Tudor beat. Sorry, it's not. It's called Renaissance, and that's spelled W-R-E-N, Renaissance, because Wren built 50 of the city's churches and St Paul's Cathedral, and he brought this English Baroque version of classical revival into the area. And instead of building modernist buildings in the 20th century, 19th and the 20th century, Britain was building these Renaissance style buildings, which is kind of a mixture between classical revival and modernism. This is the type of building that is all over, or was all over the city. It's now been knocked down and replaced buildings like this. This is by Rem Koolhaas. And this is where this is Rothschild's bank, which has a part in the story we're about to tell. That's St Stephen's Church, one of the domed churches built by Christopher Wren, and on the left is the Mansion House. This is over this building over here is a Victorian building in this Renaissance style. And these buildings I'm talking about, most of them are in the 1809 picture of London as places you should go and see. There's a list, as you'll see, there's a list of all the churches. We're now looking back the way we're not going yet. That's up, this is Poultry, up towards Cheapside. That church at the end is St Mary le Bow. And if you're born within the sound of those bells, you're a Cockney. And most 19th century members of my family were all Cockneys. And arguably by my dad, but only if the wind was blowing in the right direction when he was born in Hackney. Just round the corner here is the Guildhall. And this is where the Lord Mayor of London lived. And it looked like this at this time. If you go, this is St Lawrence Church here on your left. This building was demolished, and the building here was demolished. So this is now a much more open courtyard in front of the Guildhall. And this is the 18th century Gothic revival bit of the Guildhall, while the rest of it is built in medieval style, which you can just see at the back. So that's where the Lord Mayor lived. And that's not that's where the Lord Mayor was elected, and where the City Corporation Council of the Square Mile of London used to meet. And I don't want to say too much about it because we haven't got time. But this is where one of the greatest, well, one of the first blows against slavery took place in a case. You've probably heard of the case, but the case was when a shipping slaver threw black slaves overboard because he didn't have enough water, and he then came back to London and claimed insurance for loss of cargo. And the court case was about whether it was cargo, whether it got compensated if it was cargo. If they were human beings, it was kind of murder. And they found that it wasn't cargo. Not that anyone got charged with murder, but at least they didn't get compensation for throwing people overboard. This is a City of London merchant of the period of Jane Austen. And remember that the gardeners in Pride and Prejudice are from this area of town, and Darcy therefore looks down his long, long snobbish nose at Elizabeth Bennet because she comes from as associated with trade rather than proper gentlemen. London was very, very crowded, lots of great processions and what you might call ticker tape welcomes if you're American. And this is Cheapside, that road we've just been looking at. Poultry's behind us, Cheapside's in front of us, the Guildhall's to the right of us. And you can see all the people in their balconies, beautifully dressed, watching the Lord Mayor's procession come down. If anything happened, if a Russian embassy came to London, they would process down here. If the king was if the king's wife came, they'd process. Anyway, so there were processions with all people watching people go by, but mainly the Lord Mayor's procession but in the 18th century. This is just an aerial nighttime view of the buildings we've been talking about. So we're just behind me, and we're now looking towards the Royal Exchange straight ahead. And that's just a bit before we come down to the ground level on the right, Mansion House. And I'm interspersing these pictures with cries of London. Now, these were a set of London was famous for its cries. So there were loads of street sellers, and they all had their own cries, their own sort of nursery rhyme, or their own shout, or their own bellow, or their own plaintive appeal, and they were a popular source of illustration. Pepys had a set of them, and they went right into the 19th century. And these are mostly late 18th and 19th century versions. These here you can see the milkmaid selling milk. And this on the right, these are Georgian engravings of attractive young ladies, dairy maids and scullery maids and all sorts of, and courtesans and actresses, and they were very collectible. And I just read a piece somewhere where anyway someone talked about buying them and being able to look that not that he that no, that she would be looking in his eyes. Anyway, and here you are, the cries of London. These are most of the ones are from 1803, and these ones were depicted in a wonderful website called Spittlefield's Life by the gentle author. And he's kind of the doyen of the blog, and it's just a fantastic resource. So this is the list of churches. It's coded so you know where to find them in square B, BC, big D, little d, so you can find them. And there are, by this time, some Roman Catholic churches, because Roman Catholicism are not allowed to set up diocesan structures until 1830. So there's still some prejudice against Catholics, but they're beginning to be acceptable in society. And so there's some Roman Catholic churches. Jews had been in England since Cromwell let them come back. And then there are a list of dissenting and disestablished churches like Methodists, Quakers, Baptists, etc., and where they are. This is St Mary Walneth. This is by Hawksmoor, Wren's assistant, and architect's favorite architect, because if you look at this church, you will never see another church like it. It is totally unique. Although he's using the classical idiom, the actual balance of that is, it looks a bit precarious, doesn't it, actually, to be honest? It's not perhaps from the angle I've taken the picture, it does look a little bit. But anyway, he takes lots of risks. Um, Inside, the reason I'm showing this one is because the vicar was the vicar um, Newton, John Newton, and he was a slave trader in his time. He then saw the light and he then worked for the abolition of the slave trade, which happened in 1807, um, just before he died. And he wrote Amazing Grace and other hymns. So people like Wilberforce used to gather around him and they'd come to this church. So a very, very important church for the abolition of slave trade. And that's the altar where he would preach from. And just round the corner, so we're just, where are we? Well, we're very near to here. This is that modern building you saw poking up above. It's by Rem Koolhaas, who's the very Pritzker Prize-winning Dutch architect of the Rothschilds Bank. And in the background, you can see Christopher Wren's and Stevens. And this is Rothschild. And Rothschild's Bank lent the government £20 million to pay compensation for slavery in 1833. Now, who do they pay the compensation to? Well, not the slaves. They paid it to the slave owners, and this is the area we're in, and these are the number of people who own slaves in those streets. So we were just where were we? We were Cannon Street. Yeah, we're just London. Well, we're just over here. So in Lombard Street, there we are. 15 people in the street we're in at the moment own slaves. And you can go to the University College London website and find out how many slaves and where those slaves were. Now, Jane Austen, slavery is at the heart of Mansfield Park because is it Bertram, the man who owns Mansfield Park, is missing throughout much of the action because he's gone back to Antigua to sort his slaves out. And here's Edmund and Fanny talking, where they are mentioning slaves. And so Fanny, well, I'm not sure which one's which. It would have pleased your uncle to be inquired of further. So Fanny's saying to Edmund, you should have mentioned the slavery issue. And this book was published in 1814, and you can see the title page over here. I should say in Jane Austen's day, there was a big boycott movement, mostly led by women, particularly boycotting sugar. They were called the anti-Saccharites. Anyway, so compensation was given in 1837 to slavery. Lord Mansfield, I haven't got time really to go into Lord Mansfield, but he was involved in, there was a case where a slave got away in England from his owner, and the owner tried to get him back, and he said, "You can't. I'm in England." And Lord Mansfield, very, very reluctantly, said, "Yes, he can't be. There's nothing in the British common law which says you can have slaves in Britain." So that was one of the first chinks in the attack against slavery. So Jane Austen was aware of this, and it would have been a fierce discussion point. Like, if you want to talk to somebody and they're on the Trump side and you're on the other side, or if you're on the Brexit side or the not Brexit side, that sort of argument where you can't really have a conversation because you're just in a different planet, I think it would have been the same as slavery, really. And here's some pictures of slavery. It's also mentioned in Emma, which was published in 1816. And that's quite interesting here because what I won't go for time, I won't go through it all, but you can read it there if you like. But she's sort of saying, I'm not afraid of being. So basically, what the thing is, they're talking about slave trade, but they're comparing being a slave to being a governess. You might think that's a bit extreme, but if you read the Bronte's works, it may be not quite as extreme as you think. Well, anyway, there's a parallel to be made. And of course, being slavery is much worse than being a governess, but it was also something that had a restricted freedom around it. Um, Now, Francis Austen wrote that slavery was much to be regretted, and his brother was a delegate. This is Jane's favourite brother, Henry, the banker, soldier brother, who was a delegate in an anti-slavery conference in 1840. So we can imagine, on the one hand, Jane Austen was a compassionate, thoughtful woman, and on the other hand, I think her family would have been on the Tory side, um, the conservative side of of arguments, but perhaps not on slave. I don't know, but that's my feeling. So that she would have been against slavery. Um, and anyway, so the brother, and another thing, just so that you know that she knew an awful lot about what was going on. Her brother was vice admiral, two brothers at vice admiral, and this is a picture of the ship he commanded, which is a third-rate 70-gun vessel, and he was in charge of the navy in America. Um, During that time of the 1812 battle, I think. Um, and we're back here again, coming away from slavery, and we're going to go to the Royal Exchange. Now, that's what the Royal Exchange looks like now, but it burned down in the Victorian period. It also burnt down the Great Fire of London. So this is the second version of the Royal Exchange, and the Royal Exchange was the big business centre. It was also where Ricardo worked. Now, I don't want to go too much into Ricardo, but one of the big things to remember is that I'd love to see David Ricardo talking to Donald Trump about tariffs, because David Ricardo is kind of with Adam Smith, is probably the founder of capitalism in many ways, because he showed that if England makes cloth and sells that cloth to Portugal, who make wine, that if we sell them cloth and they sell us wine in exchange, they'll have more cloth and we'll have more wine. Both of us will be better off because we're making what we're good at making. They're good at making wine, we're good at making cloth. So if you put tariffs on to protect your cloth working, which is more inefficient, then you don't get the benefits of trade. And David Ricardo proved this to most economists' satisfaction, which is why free trade had become almost universally accepted amongst economists. I'm not saying they're right. I mean, don't. I'm not trying to make a political point here. I'm just saying that Ricardo, who worked at the Royal Exchange or near the Royal Exchange, did that work at this time. Again, that's another view of the Royal Exchange. And inside, it was like an open courtyard. They're basically modelled a Roman forum or a Low Countries town hall, um, like in Ypres or any Brussels or any northern European town. And inside you had traders, and this is where you could. Previously, you'd be in Lombard Street in the open air. Well, from the 16th century onward, business deals could be done undercover. And all these would be offices and trading places. And this is another thing that this book of 1809 is so good at. It gives you some amazing viewpoints. But though London's really distinguished for the general propriety of its appearance, which arises out of the general excellence of its morals and manners, it must be acknowledged that the feature which above all marks this great capital is the magnitude of its commerce. Situation, a long continued current of successful accidents with a genius for gain, elevated above and directing the whole to its own purpose, although not to the exclusion, yet to the subjection of all other objects, hath in London reared up an emporium that the merchants of other nations, with all his knowledge of the power of commerce, surveys with inexpressible wonder. So here he's saying in a very long-winded way that London is the envy of all other merchants because and London concentrates on being a market and a successful place of commerce, and it has used this to become becoming the most powerful nation in the world. I mean, of course, we now know that a lot of this, well, at least some of it was coming from slavery, but it and the empire, but it was also coming from commerce and the control of the seas. So an amazing place, London. It gives you this book gives you the view that London really was the capital of the world, or becoming the capital of the world. So this is the what was inside the Royal Exchange. You've got the Virginian merchants would be over here, Jamaican merchants, Spanish, Jews. Portugal, America, Dutch and Jewelry Walk, Scotch Walk, Irish Walk, East Country Walk, Norway Walk, West Castle, anyway, East Indies Walk, silkmen, clothiers, handbag, sorters, brokers of stocks, Italian Walk, Canary Walk, that's Canary Islands, Barbados Walk, French Walk, grocers and druggists Walk. So all the different trades and places all in here. You could go and get Dutch East India shares here, for example. And this is what Voltaire said a bit earlier than we are at the moment. Take a view of the Royal Exchange in London, a place more venerable than many courts of justice, where the representation of all nations meet for the benefit of mankind. There you will find the Jew, the Mohammedan, and the Christian. They transact together as though they are all profess the same religion, and give the name of infidel to none but bankrupts. There, the Presbyterian confides in the Anabaptist, and the Churchman depends on the Quaker's word, and all are satisfied. So there's a materialistic view of how to make the world go round. Money, money, money. Now, if you want educating, the book tells you where you can be educated. And in this particular, it's quite interesting here, but there's the Royal Institution in Albemarle Street, which is still educating the public. They have a very famous Christmas lecture every Christmas. And Gresham College, which Christopher Wren was the professor of, used to lecture in the Royal Exchange. And it still does lecture from or near the Royal Exchange. It's kind of become like a free college. But you can see they endowed professors of liberal sciences, divinity, law, physics, astronomy, geometry, music, and rhetoric. The lectures are given gratis twice a day in a room over the east end of the Royal Exchange. So it's like the Open University. And it still has a similar sort of function with a whole series of lectures. And then it tells you under the public lectures bit that go down to Thomas and Guy's Hospital, where the great Henry Klein and Ashley Cooper, and I used to run the old Operating Theatre Museum, so these are names that I used to conjure with. And I used to do Ashley Cooper's operations. I mean, pretend to do them because I couldn't actually do them. And you can go over there to see anatomy and learn anatomy and the operation of surgery and the principles and practice of surgery. Of course, you had to sign as an apprentice, but people did go in and you could watch. We've got pictures of people watching who were not medical students. You just had to get in the door or bribe the porter to get in to see the great Ashley Cooper operating. So here we go again. There's a few more. So what are we selling here? We're selling cherries. We're now going to the Bank of England. Now, I've already mentioned the Bank of England, so just to have a look at it. So in 1733, all the way through to beyond the death of, it was put in this spot in 1733, I think it was. And then Sir John Soane was the architect from the late 18th right through until after Jane Austen died. And I'm going to show you some of the architecture in a moment. But we a bit of sleuthing work done by which is mentioned on this bankunderground.co.uk website, which you've got here at the bottom, by John Avery Jones. They found the records of Jane Austen of Chawton. Look at that signature there. Look at that. And she's got £600. So the big question is, how much did she make from her? And there's her sister's name here as well, Cassandra Elizabeth Austen. So she's got £600 in the bank. And anyway, I won't go through the details, but John Avery Jones and other people worked out that she had £631 that she made from publishing her books. Now, that is about what her dad made in a year when he was running three churches, a farm, and a school for boys. So a I've, I've been telling people it's about £40,000, 30 to £40,000 for a long time, just by my own estimation, how much of a middle class person would could live on. So that's and other I've seen other estimations that she had about £500 which she made from writing at the end of her life. So anyway, £631, £575 after tax, and that would have kept her in a very comfortable middle class lifestyle for a couple of years or so. I mean, you can't live on £45,000 for the rest of your life if you're in your 40s, but it would give you 5% interest, which would be about, how much would that be? So if it's 10%, it would be 4,500, 450. So yeah, you might be getting £200 a month. So I'm using the 45,000. Anyway, £600 was not enough to live on for the rest of your life. It would be you would be getting about £50 a year on interest on it at most. And £50 a year was just starvation level for a middle class person. You can survive, but not with any comfort. Um, a useful sum of money, but not something to live on for the rest of your life. Anyway, these are the rather beautiful interiors by Sir John Soane. He was the king of the low dome and no windows approach. As you can see from these beautiful interiors. They're all gone, by the way. They were destroyed when they rebuilt the bank in the 20th century. And here's the big banking hall. So Jane Austen was banking at the Bank of England. Um, and she had £10, I think, in her brother's bank. Here you are, buying hot cross buns. We're still here. We should get moving. Now, the stock exchange is over to the left. Just here is a stock exchange. Um, as it was, it's moved somewhere else now, but that's where it used to be. And in Jane Austen's day, there was a brokers exchange in the bank itself. So this is another Sir John Soane interior. So this was the floor. This was the trading floor of the Bank of England in the around about 1800, and then after that they made their own building and they became a proper institution in their own right, the stock exchange. Um, and here you've got a list of coffee houses. And the reason I put this down here because the most famous coffee houses, I must have used this one, are going to be on this list, but I'm running out of time to search for them. But Garraway's and Jonathan's were the ones that were the stock exchange coffee houses. So different coffee houses were used. And this is Garraway's on the left, which was one of the with Jonathan's was where the stock exchange used to meet before it became formalized in the building that we just saw the picture of. So this is where all the stockbrokers lived and traded. And that's why you know in Jane Austen how wealthy everybody is because they've invested their money in the City of London, and most people invested their money in annuities. So you'd have a portfolio of shares, and that would give you a yearly annuity. And so that you know that Bingley was worth £2,000 and that a year, and that Darcy was worth £10,000 a year, and that Elizabeth Bennet had £40 a year. Mr. Bennet had £200,000 a year, but his house was entailed. Anyway, so I'm not going to go through that at the moment. So Jonathan's was the other great stockbrokers, and this is where this is just a little walk through this area as it is today, and it's a rather cute little backside streets, and taking us to very famous places in the City of London. With the South Sea, that's a South Sea bubble taking place, and these are insurance companies. And Garraway's, that's Garraway's where it is. And this is where the first coffee house was in London. And that's where the Lloyd's Coffee House used to be. That's Lombard Street, where all the main banks centres were. Um, and when does this stop? And that's a counting house. Um, and that's the beginning. Um, so, post offices. Now, I mean, this is incredible. Look, there were six deliveries a day. So, uh, 8 o'clock, I post the letter. You get it by 10 o'clock. I've got a reply by 12. We meet for lunch. It's email. It's email. It's you get a reply in a couple of hours if you're living in central London. Six posts a day. Now we're lucky now if we get one post every 2 days, but in those days they had six posts a day. So in communication and information was at the heart of Britain's success. Trollope worked for the post office, and he was the person who was said to have actually designed or been in charge of the design of the first letterbox for the penny post. Um, so we're now here at Cornhill, and we're going to go along Cornhill towards the end of the city. This is Leadenhall Market, which was built actually in 1888, but there was a big building here in Jane Austen's day called the Leadenhall. And This is Grace Gracechurch Street, and Elizabeth Bennet comments on Darcy's opinion of Gracechurch Street, where his aunt and uncle live. Mr. Darcy may have heard of a place called Gracechurch Street, but he would hardly think a month's ablution enough to cleanse him from its impurities. So it's to do with trade, not being gentlemen. And so this is Elizabeth knows that he's prejudiced because she's got an uncle who works in the city. That's Pride and Prejudice. So again, even though a lot of her books are not in books are not about London, London appears in them. This is just a bit of self interest. But around this is 1780s, just before Jane Austen was born in 1775. So and this was the 1782 or something like that. And this is my ancestor, possibly my ancestor. We don't know he's my ancestor, but there aren't many floods. And he lives in Gracechurch Street, that street. And what he did was he was a pawnbroker and silversmith, and he made these medallions, which he sent to Dartmouth College in America. And again, I don't want to go through it in any great details, but Dartmouth College were amazingly grateful to receive it from a respectable gentleman, which I doubt that he was, an elegant gold medal, which certainly the Victor and Albert Museum doesn't think is particularly well made or very elegant, nor is it a very ingenious design. But anyway, it's basically at the time when it probably was treason to do it, he's saying, well done on forming America, my ancestor. So that's also happening. It's 1786. So Jane Austen would be 10 when my ancestor said to America, well done. And in this area where St. Clement's Church is, that's St. Clement's Church, St. Clement's Lane, this is where Lydia and Wickham were married. And that's the gardeners referred to again there. And we're going together, says Lydia Bennet, to in Pride and Prejudice. So one of the other people going was Darcy, and Darcy is looking after Lydia's position on behalf of the Bennets, which is why Elizabeth begins to change her attitude towards Darcy. Wickham, we always imagine, well, is really realizing he's kind of made a big mistake. But on the other hand, people are beginning to realize that actually Lydia wasn't a empty-headed gold digger, but just trying to make her way in life. And she was delighted by the marriage. Here is someone selling primroses. So we're now in Cornhill. This is St. Clement's Church. We're now going along Leadenhall Street. So we've gone from Cornhill to Leadenhall Street, and we're going here. This is the East India House, which was I mean, this is one of the big slave trading organizations, had virtual, well, became the government of India, a private company governing India, um, conquering India. And you think, how does that work in the law? But it did, and became one of the richest place companies in the world, and created capitalism. And again, um, gives a grandeur that gives a faint idea of the concerns of those opulent traders. Now, Jane Austen knew about those opulent traders because um, her cousin Elizabeth de Fulliard, who married her brother, she was a daughter of Philadelphia, and Philadelphia, her mother, had gone to India to probably find a husband, and she found a husband, uh, Mr. Hancock, who she married. And when she came back, her daughter Eliza Hancock, as she was before she married a French aristocrat. She was given lots of money by Warren Hastings, and Warren Hastings was the East India Company's Governor General of India. And he was accused of bribery and corruption because, I mean, they were so wealthy, they became known as nabobs because the leaders of the East India Company were so wealthy and they were able to make so much money in pursuit of governing that country that he was he was acquitted, but I think everyone thought he it was inevitable he must have been corrupt. And anyway, he gave money to Elizabeth to Hancock. We don't know why. Maybe because he was so rich. Um, and she married a French aristocrat who was guillotined in the French Revolution, and then came back to England and married Henry Austen, Jane's brother. This is Warren Hastings. Um, this is Philadelphia. Or is that Elizabeth? I don't know, to be honest. And here is Henry, who starts off as a soldier, then becomes a banker. Then when he becomes bankrupt, he becomes a curate. And this is him as a chastened curate. And this is George Austen's sister, Philadelphia. And this is her daughter, the one I'm talking about, who marries Henry and was a good friend of Jane Austen. And they had a servant called Manon. And Jane Austen, when she died, she left her money to her brother, who was penniless, having gone bankrupt, and having a pittance of a curate's wage. And she left the rest of it to Manon, who was these two people's servant. And she would have lost her job when Henry was made bankrupt. Anyway, and this is just to give you an idea, it was one of the biggest scandals of the period when Warren Hastings was tried. And this is a 20th century depiction of the trial of Warren Hastings. So, I'm trying to give you an idea. Jane Austen was really well connected. I mean, much better connected than you can, almost imagine. And nearby was the Hudson Bay Company. Um, and then there was the Royal Africa Company. And the Royal Africa Company was set up by Charles II and James, his brother. And you can see traded basically in gold from the Guinea coast and slaves. So again, the royal family are deeply implicated in the slave trade. This is a map of the time, Negro land here. This is the Guinea coast, where all the slave entree ports were, and all the collection points where the slaves were brought in from Negro land and then sold to the European traders on the Guinea coast, the Gold Coast, the Benin coast, and the Grain Coast, but generally called Guinea. And this is a sketch of a guinea, which ended up being a pound and a shilling. This is one of those horrifying trading centers. Very famous book by Ignatius Sancho, who told about his life as a slave. Um, and this is next door was the Baltic Exchange, which is the place where you've got a cargo, your cargo's going here, then you want to offload the cargo, have another cargo, and this is where you exchange cargoes and arrange cargoes. And near Lloyd's of London, where the cargoes were insured, so all the things that's the Baltic Exchange. Um, and this is another map, and then we're now going to nip out to the east and go to see the docks. And so there were 3,500 ships, 13,500 cargo, and 11,000 ships in the river, together with 3,500 barges and 3,000 wherries, 4,000 labourers lading the unladen ships, and 1,200 revenue officers. So, an absolutely huge space of 6 miles on the Thames, from 2 miles above to 4 miles below. London Bridge taken up with this amazing port from London Bridge all the way to Limehouse, which is where Ian McKellen's got a pub called the Grapes, which you should go and visit. It's my favourite pub. So we're now down here by the docks, and we're going to go into to see the London docks via the Tower of London. So this is a bit out of focus, but you see all the boats that are there, the Tower of London here. Now this became ridiculous when the Napoleonic War took place, which Captain Wentworth and Admiral Croft and her two brothers were involved in. And so what they did was they set up convoys, which the brothers would have protected as they came back to England. And because they had them in convoys, they couldn't cope with all the ships that were coming into London. So they built these wonderful docks. And this is one of the two first docks were the Canary, were West Indies docks and London dock. And this is London dock. And Helen Mirren lives somewhere near, just over here, I think. Anyway, so these wonderful docks were built. Nothing like them had ever been seen before, apart from in the Roman period. And here's some views of the dock. So there's sort of Ivory House, and there's Tobacco Dock, and there's all the spices were coming in, cinnamon dock, coriander dock, and all the London was just full of ivory, all these different stuffs coming, as we're going to see in a moment. And I'm sorry, I'm having to speed up because we're going to run out of time. And 762-foot long tobacco dock. This is tobacco dock. These are the dock. I mean, just look at the size of this dock here. This is near Limehouse. It's in Wapping. This is the church in Wapping. Limehouse is further over, and that's West Indies. No, that's looking back at the City of London. Sorry, I'm looking in the wrong direction. And these are the warehouses, all built out of brick. It's very, very beautiful, although they haven't really found a decent use for it. It was a shopping market at one point. So these are sort of things that are coming in to London, and I won't let you. I'll let you read them, but let's just go through some of them. Tea, obviously. Coconut. I mean, just look, we're importing coconuts from wherever coconuts are grown. I mean, from the South Seas. It's incredible. Why aren't they making them into coconut mats and selling us the coconut? Because we want to make the profit on it. Elephants. Just think how many elephants that is. And this is in the 1920s, 1930s. And here are the docks. West Indies docks, and they did not just build a dock, they also built a canal, and that canal, you've got the East Indies docks over here, the West Indies docks here. This is sugar and rum mainly, and this is Limehouse here, and they built the canal so that ships it cut one day off the trip to London docks. Anyway, this is all about that's talking about the canal, which saves all the time to go around. And this is a map of it, and that's the canal I'm talking about there. And these are the two, the import and the export docks over here. And then these are wet docks for other purposes. And these are the Surrey docks over here, where they mostly had timber from Canada and the Baltic. There's this wonderful inscription which is written, it seems to me, by the same person who wrote the Declaration of Independence. And I'll just read you a little bit just to give you the flavour of the English of the. This is 1804, 1805. Of this range of buildings constructed together with the ancient docks at the expense of public spirited individuals under the sanction of a provident legislature and with the liberal cooperation of the corporate body of the City of London for the distinct purpose of complete security and ample accommodation, hitherto not afforded for the shipping and produce of the West Indies at this wealthy port. The first stone was laid, and then it goes to mention all the people who were involved, and which an undertaking which, under the favour of God, shall contribute stability, increase, and ornament to British commerce. And that's just near the wall, which is saying, keep out. And inside, there's a statue to Robert Millikan was one of the uh, people who put all that together, and those are the docks behind him, the sugar docks behind him. The Museum of London is now there, the Docklands Museum of London, and Millikan being involved with sugar, and he Black Lives Matter, and he's been taken down and put inside the museum. And this is a picture of the docks. And as I said, people came all over the world to see the docks because they were such a wonder. And these are the import and the export docks, and that's the canal I was talking about. It saves so much time because you're going three sides around a square, and the wind's bound to be in the wrong direction at some point going round the Isle of Dogs. Here you are. You can see sugar being traded here, and this is the whole deal. Is you come from London, Bristol, or Liverpool, or maybe Glasgow, but mostly Bristol and Liverpool. And it's called the triangular trade. You go to sell, you bring trinkets and sell them in exchange for or guns, whiskey, and swap them for slaves. Then you take the slaves to the West Indies, and pick up sugar and rum. And then if you've got any more capacity, you go to America where you get tobacco and trade there and make some more money, and then bring tobacco back. And you can see the different trade stuffs, although they don't actually mention what they sell. In this somehow the drive only realised this before. There's nothing sold to Africa according to this, which is obviously false. Um, and I mean, the horrors of the slave trade. These are benign bronzes, which show the nobility of the Africans of that area. And this is what it's become post the closing of the docks. It's now called Canary. That's Canary Wharf in the middle, and it's the home. It's a financial centre in London. Um, and in case you want to know how much compensation you might reasonably be expecting, well, that compensation of £20 million that we paid the slave owners seems to me to be a good figure, 20 million. But if you increase it by inflation, it comes to 16 billion. So it seems to me that 16 billion pounds spent on educational projects for people who are descendants of people who suffered at the hands of slavery would be a good start for Britain to do some good from all the harm that was done in the enriching of the country. But anyway, I never was in favour of reparations because it all seemed so long ago. But when I remember that we only stopped paying off that £20 million amount of money recently, it just seems, we compensated the owners. I mean, that just seems to be so outrageous that I can't help but think that we should now compensate the slaves equally, if not doubly so. Anyway, so we're over here and we're turning backwards, I hope. Green Hastings are peas, I think. I've been trying to find out what green Hastings were, and I think they're a variety of pea or bean. But they're often mentioned in the cries, and they obviously pea pods, I think. And I've not been able to find them, so let's go back. He's a cane worker repairing chairs. This is the city wall. The city wall is one of the wonders of London, which you can see now, and you could see it then in small fragments. You can see much more of it now because of the Blitz, but you could see bits of it in their period in the 19th century, and that is the Roman city wall. And here's a list of antiquities, starting with London Stone, which we are going to see in a minute, and then Westminster Abbey, then the Sanctuary, the Chapel of Henry VIII, then Westminster Hall, then the Tower of London, and it tells you what to see in the Tower of London. So let's go to the Tower of London, which is just through Tower Hill. This is where Thomas More and the Duke of Monmouth were beheaded. And then you walk across into the Tower of London and you go round, look at the crown jewels, which is what we do to this day, and people did it then. But you also go into the armories like we do now. And I once took a group of Hell's Angels who were not at all interested in the City of London but wanted to see the armory. And in those days, the suit of armours were modelled on horses. And you could see look at all these suits of armour you could see. And here is a statue of Queen Elizabeth that you could see. So there were pageants in the Tower of London. That's from the London Museum, which used to be at Kensington Palace. And I can't remember why I put George IV in here, but he's the Prince Regent at this time, and he does have a little part to play in Jane Austen's story, and that is she dedicated Emma to him. Probably not because she wanted to. In fact, his librarian suggested that the king would be happy if she dedicated her book to him, and she wrote back saying, "Is that a command or a request?" And the librarian said, "Well, a request from the king is tantamount to being a command." So I don't think she liked Prince Regent because of his immorality, but she dedicated her book to him anyway. So we're now on Tower Hill, going past All Hallows Tower of London Church, into the City of London, signified by the red Crusader cross with the the sword of St. Paul. He was beheaded. Past All Hallows by the Tower, which had antiquities in the basement of it, and through into that big road we're talking about, and going down towards London Bridge. And we're just going to go to the monument to the Great Fire of London, another one of the objects that she suggests you go and see. And that's where in Jane Austen's day, that would have been the road to London Bridge, the most famous bridge in the world after the Rialto and the Ponte Vecchio in Florence and Venice. Probably more famous than them, arguably, but that's where it was at the end of that road to the right of the tower. Uh, that's where you got onto the bridge, and that's the pedestrians went through that arch, and the carriages went to the right of you underneath the clock. And that took you to the bridge. Here's the monument here. These are all the Christopher Wren buildings. I can date this quite accurately by the bridge, because the bridge has got no shops on it. Those were pulled down in the early 18th century. And the bridge was pulled down in 1830. So this is before 1830. The monument, so Christopher Wren built all these churches and St Paul's Cathedral. And Blackfriars Bridge is built, so that makes it after 1780-ish. I'm not exactly sure about the date of Blackfriars Bridge. I don't hold that in my mind. That's Westminster Abbey in the background. This is Southwark over here. That's Guy's Hospital, shown there, one of the great hospitals of London, where Ashley Cooper worked, and the book mentions him. And that is St Tulli's Church, and that is Southwark Cathedral, and that's Fleet Street and the Strand going around there. And look at all the ships. And these are all docks all the way along here, all the way until World War II. These were docks, and these are all docks, as you can see over here. This is where most tobacco was landed, and the herbs were all landed just up here. The Lord Mayor's show until a certain date was by river, rather than when the river got too polluted and they stopped. So round about, this is 1789, so after this the river got too polluted to anybody who would want to go in the river, so they went by road, but they still called the pageant wagons floats. Originally, the pageants were on the boats, and then they went by land. You can see the brand new building by Robert Adams, the over here, this range of buildings over here, which name I've just suddenly forgotten, but and that is the bridge, probably Blackfriars Bridge with St Paul's Cathedral. Look at the beautiful view. That skyline that we've been looking at in these two was ruined by Macmillan in after World War II when he did kind of what Keir Starmer's trying to do now is to kickstart commerce, and he gave commerce the ability to build what it liked in the City of London. And that meant that they obscured the view with tall buildings, which I, for one, regret. Last no, I haven't checked whether she was in London in 1814, but this was the last frost fair, the last time the Thames was frozen over, because in 1830 the bridge was pulled down, and as you can see, the reason it was frozen, was because the arches narrowed the water flow and it made it slow enough to freeze over. Once it was replaced by a five-arch bridge, um, that meant that the river flowed much quicker and it could no longer freeze. Talking about being cold, this is from a fashion book and shows you a beautiful way of keeping warm. Look at that muff. Lots of things you can keep in that muff. So I imagine it's also sort of like a handbag, really. And all trimmed with fur that would have come in from the Hudson Bays Company and from Canada. Just briefly talking about the parks, they've now become parks, particularly for the middle classes to walk through. And Jane Austen often walked in them, and these are walking with her brother Henry and his partners. Mr. Tillotson, I know, is one of Henry's partners in the bank. And the book tells us all about which were the best parks to walk in. Jane wrote, "The driving about, the carriage being open was very pleasant. I liked my solitary elegance very much and was ready to laugh all the time. And at my being where I was, I could not but feel that I had naturally small right to be parading around London in a barouche." So that's her brother's carriage, and it's just like Passeggiare waving at all the good, great and the good. And the well dressed, particularly the well dressed. And here you can see a frisky view of taking the air in Hyde Park. Some people riding on horses, others walking, and other people, in fact, most people are on carriages, aren't they? A bit quieter today. This is the Royal Palace of Kensington Palace, and this is the garden she was talking about. And they are also in Hyde Park. That's Achilles. You can see that from the road, which now goes up. But the Queen Mother's gates are just over to the left of us, where they are now, because Queen Mother wasn't alive then, so the gates weren't there. There were some gates, but not the gates were built to named after her. Anyway, beautiful equipage and a very wealthy man, this particular carriage. This is a cartoon of the stupid fashions that people were wearing with ridiculously big hats. Achilles again, who's still there. Look at their fat thighs and their big noses and their outrageous top hats. Hyde Park was a favourite place for jousting, and a close reading of Sense and Sensibility suggested that Colonel Brandon had a duel with Willoughby, because Willoughby ruined Colonel Brandon's protege. And we know that prime ministers and foreign ministers fought duels, and we know that Charles James Fox, who was prime minister, fought a duel. And so that's why Darcy and everyone knew how to shoot. They would own a chute for shooting snipes and other wildfowl and other animals, but they would also have pistols in case they were called to have a duel, and they would have learned how to shoot and fence, partly for leisure and pleasure, and partly for in case they went in the army, or partly because they might need to fight a duel. Um, so that's about Kensington Gardens. That's about the freezing of Kensington Gardens in the winter, which we can see in these shots. There was a famous occasion when the ice broke underneath the weight of people, but generally people had a nice time skating on it. This is Billingsgate Fish Market, and this talks about the Forest of March masts that we've seen elsewhere. And here are people selling mackerels. So we're going now to St Paul's Cathedral, and we're around about this area, but we're going to go up to London Stone, which is just here. And this is the most famous antiquity of London, and we still don't know what it is, but it's been in various places, in various configurations, but we know it was there and famous in the 12th century, 11th, in the 11th, 12th century. The first Lord Mayor of London is called Henry Fitzaylwyn of London Stone. It doesn't say why it was famous, but it became known as London Stone. And I won't go through the possible ones, but a milestone from which the measurements of London were made is possible. A coronation stone has also been mooted, a druid stone has been suggested. I personally think it's the centre of the administration of the power over the river, because there's a London stone at Staines, which is the extent of the Lord Mayor's power over the River Thames. And there was another one towards Greenwich, not Greenwich, Gravesend, in the other direction. And I think this is the central point. That's my own theory, which I haven't told anybody apart from you. The Cries of London is a slightly later, and you can see a night watchman. 5 o'clock in the morning, and all is well, with sunny day, with rain later on today. And they would give news, and they were wake people up in the middle of the night. This one's it's saying it's past 10 o'clock, time to get up. It's got a ratchet, like a football ratchet. I don't know if you use those in America. But anyway, they both got ratchets and big sticks to hit people with. And we're going into St Paul's Cathedral. That was a model of it, which you can still see in St Paul's. That's Christopher Wren's model. And we're looking out of Christopher Wren's model towards, that's Fleet Street, Ludgate Circus, Fleet Street, and then the Strand. And then we're going to be back to the East End. All the bookshops, the Brontes were published just near here, and the Cries of London I'm looking at was published in that shop there to the left, Harris, the corner of St Paul's Churchyard. They can't be more precise than that. These are some books. It's an advert for books in the picture of London. So what are you going to read? I think this is really fascinating. The history and discovery of settlement to the present time of North and South America and the West Indies. The histories of Scotland and Ireland by the same man. The Lady's History of England by Charlotte Smith. The Universal History. That would be very popular. There are quite a few universal histories been written recently. The Wonders of the Telescope. The System of the World. A Visit to a Farmhouse for somebody who's interested in modern science farming business. A Dictionary of Music. The Complete System of Shorthand Writing. So they're just some of the many, many books that anyway, they're mentioned in the 1809 picture of London. These people are queuing up for caricatures, and you know that in those days caricatures were far ruder than we are allowed to be. Interesting in this picture, look at this man here. He has lost his legs. That's presuming one of the many wars that Britain was involved in. And he gets around by dragging himself around on a sledge. Hogarth also has a picture similar to this. Okay, so this is talking about buying a book in Britain. Here's one of those alluring Georgian prints I was talking about. And there's another, and another, and another. And the first one, by the way, was a courtesan. And this lady was the most famous, one of the most famous courtesans. And they were a bit like the Kardashians. I'm I have to apologize to the Kardashians. I'm not saying the Kardashians are anything other than interested fashion, but in the same way that there was that celebrity culture. Now, in those days, there was celebrity culture, but one of the people who were chief in the celebrity cultures were the courtesans. And one of the most famous courtesans is Kitty Fisher. And there was this incident, which I mean, it's deplorable. It's a very deplorable picture because poor girl, poor woman, she fell off her horse and the paparazzi are there to sketch it. I mean, obviously they didn't have to do it there and then, and they sketched her exposing her legs because she fell off the. I mean, come on, it's like all those pictures of famous people getting out of taxis and the paparazzi's shooting to get a picture of their legs. And we're now coming to the edge of the city, and this is the River Fleet here, and this is what London looked like before round about 1800, because the Great Fire buildings were still there, and these were all rebuilt after the Great Fire of London. This either in this fine style here or this utilitarian style here, and sort of sponsored by Christopher Wren. And these were beginning to be pulled down. Scrooge would have lived just here and would have lived in a house like this, fictionally. But these buildings were beginning to be pulled down from the mid 18th century. There's still a lot of them around by 1809, and there's not so many around now. But anyway, that's what London looked like. And this one just says how good the houses were. Each story is a large room in front, and the back is a smaller room, and the space occupied by the staircase. This, however, is only meant as to the general class of house. Those are the nobility. Anyway, it goes on about houses, how convenient they are. They've all got leaden pipes, and I think I read this a bit earlier. So the whole place is wonderfully commodious and clean. We did have this before. London is less populous to its extent than many other cities. This is still true. London is still a low density city, although we're trying hard to stop it. London spread outwards. It never really got below 5 to 7 stories high in the centre and 2 or 3 stories at the edges. And to this day, most of it is 2 or 3 stories high, although that's changing. So it was a low density city, although in the poorest areas, there was huge overcrowding, something like 10 people per room in areas of the East End. And you've got the kitchen and the servants' kitchen below. Then you've got the parlour, the dining room, the drawing room, another parlour, then the bedrooms, the children on the upper floor with the servants having the other part of the upper floor. This is a doll's house, showing you an elegant Georgian house at the Bethnal Green Museum. And every house, the smog was beginning to accumulate, so London was beginning to be terribly polluted. It wasn't really as bad until the 19th century, but everyone was using coal in the 18th century, and the river was full of pollution. As the population rose, the river couldn't cope with the pollution, and the air couldn't cope with the smog. And these were all different coal holes in. Where did I take these? Chelsea, I think. I've forgotten where I took them all. Anyway, Chelsea. And here's the dustman collecting the dust, because there's so much dust from the fires that around London were huge heaps of rubbish, mostly full of dust. There were dust hills. There was one in Whitechapel. There was one up by King's Cross that Dickens talks about in Our Mutual Friends, I think it is, and others elsewhere. And poor people would be picking the bones of the dust heaps to try and find anything that they could make a farthing from. So everywhere distinguished by neatness and comfort. Loads and loads of shop with the unrivaled aspect of wealth and splendour, decorated with taste. There's 8,000 streets, lanes, alleys, and courts, 60 squares, 160,000 houses, warehouses, and other buildings. London abounds with markets, warehouses, and shops, etc., etc. Lamp lighters, the streets are beginning to be lit with oil lights. There's a new fresh water supply called the New River, tapping into springs in the unpolluted part of the north of London and bringing it into the centre of London. Originally pulled up by windmills and later on pulled up by steam engines. Um, some of the old houses still survived, and this is a smattering of them. A lot of these sort of places appear in Dickens's fiction. Um, and Here's a tinker who's fixing people's pots and pans. Here's a sweep who's sweeping your windows. And here is Blackfriars Bridge with St Paul's in the background. And then we're now going to go along Fleet Street to the Exeter Exchange and then to Charing Cross. I think that's where we're going. This is that bridge I was talking about, looking across the river to the south bank, and we are now about here. And across the river was Astley's amphitheatre, which mostly had sort of circus type acts in it. Very, very famous. Jane Austen mentions it. Harriet Smith and Robert Smith go there for an outing in Emma. The other most famous place is mentioned in the 1809 book is Ranelagh and Vauxhall, two of the world's greatest pleasure gardens. And Here's flowers for your garden. Here's green ivy. Now, ground ivy was used for all sorts of purposes, although I'm not quite sure why so much of it was sold. Health, amongst others. I don't. And London was surrounded by tea gardens, so you've got pleasure gardens with the really big ones where everyone went to get drunk and meet the opposite sex or the sex that they were interested in, and have a wild time. But there were also tea gardens, which were a bit like that, but probably a bit more subdued. And I won't go through all of them, but you've got one at well, we've got several there. We get Hornsey, Willoughby, one in Camden, another one in Islington, Bayswater, Pentonville, City Road, Hoxton. This is where my family were brought up, and so on and so forth. So Camberwell, all around London, you've got pleasure tea gardens, um, and so beside the principal pleasures of tea gardens, there are a number of tea gardens which are frequented by the middling class of the community, especially on Sundays during the summer. The elegant manner of the entertainment, 24 of these gardens in the environs of London. And then it goes on, besides the public theatres and gardens already mentioned, the following is a list of the most remarkable objects and amusements in London, which I'm going to go and go through some of those in a moment. We're back to the bridge. We're now walking past the legal area with Bridewell prison down here, and then on to the this is a medieval view of it, so I shouldn't really be showing you this. But anyway, the inner temple and the middle temple, and then Lincoln's Inn up over here, and Gray's Inn further north. So the big principal legal areas of London, and over here you've got the list of prisons where the police officers are. It tells you if you get robbed, these are the people who might be able to help you out, and these people give you advice as to how not to get robbed. This is Bridewell Prison, which was a prison for delinquents, and particularly for women who'd fallen on hard times. And this is prostitutes with their babies who have been arrested for prostitution. This is from Hogarth, showing a young lady being sold by her relative to the board, who works for this gentleman here, and it's the harlot's tale, beginning of the harlot's tale. This is a seamstress, and lots of seamstress were fair game for people who were preying on young women. Green cucumbers. Couple of buildings in Fleet Street, just to give you an idea of the old medieval buildings still surviving. These are probably 16th, 17th century. This is where the newspapers were. The book tells you what the newspapers you can get and where to get the newspapers from. This is Fleet Street today, looking at St Paul's Cathedral in the distance. This was a waxworks. Prince Henry's room, and that's the entrance to the Middle Temple, and the inner temple there, and the Middle Temple to the right. This is the waxworks I was talking about. And that it talks about the waxworks, the overthrow of Queen Boadicea, the tragical death of her two princely daughters, King Charles I upon the fatal scaffold. So lots of tableaus with waxworks in it. Um, so this is where Sweeney Todd, in fiction, or was it? He kept his baker's house, his hairdressers, where he killed people. And that's it in real life. And you can see the People's Journal and the Dundee Courier. This is where they were printed, typical tall, thin Fleet Street houses. That's the Temple. And these are the list of the old medieval legal inns. Furnival's Inn is where Dickens was married. Staple Inn is in one of his books. And anyway, um, there's lots of jostling, and this book tries to tell people to walk on one side of the road or the other. It's quite a complicated. I haven't quite worked out whether it's walking on the left or walking on the right yet, but it's so crowded that you should all walk in an orderly way, and then we won't find so much trouble. And if there's any trouble, it then gives you the addresses of places down there where you can go and find people who can help you out. If you want to prosecute or detect cheats or swindlers, go to Mr. Hunt of Warwick Court. Very, very practical book. Um, Organization of that's carrying on about the organization of how to sort out nuisances and swindlers and things like that. This is Fleet Street and Temple Bar. Temple Bar was actually the edge of the City of London. It was marked by a gate, which was pulled down at some point. And here's watercress being sold. This is where Jane Austen bought tea. I'm sorry to hear there's been a rise in tea. I do not mean to pay Twinings till later in the day when we may order a fresh supply. So this is you can still buy tea in Twinings, and they had their main warehouse at the back in Fleet Street, just where the Fleet Street becomes a Strand. So this is a little bit of history about Twinings, if you haven't got time to look at. The law courts were just to the right, and we are just outside Temple Bar, and then going past this church here, St Mary's, and the Courtauld Institute, Somerset House, and walking into the Strand. So that's Somerset House in front of us, where the Courtauld now is, and to the left, that's St Mary's Church. And then to the right of us, if we turn round and go west, is the Lyceum Theatre, one of the principal theatres that the book tells us to go and see, and where Ellen Terry and Henry Irving performed. And I should say that Bob Marley performed in here, and I saw the Bloomtown Rats here. There you go. That brings it up to modern day. Here you can see the beautiful view of 18th century London. Look at that skyline that was ruined. And that's London Bridge before they took the houses off the top of it. And you can see all the barges. This is an 18th century view by Canaletto. Or Jolly, I think it's Canaletto, but anyway. And this is 18th century Covent Garden, one of the first piazzas in London, which Jane Austen would have almost certainly visited, and one of the first Greek temple style churches. And this one is designed by Inigo Jones as the Actors' Church. It's called St Paul's Covent Garden. Strawberry cellar, spiced gingerbread cellar. That's looking back at the church, St Mary's Strand. And this is the Exeter Exchange over here to the left, which had a royal menagerie in it and a waxworks. This is where the elephant had to be killed. Simpsons, famous for Sherlock Holmes used to hang out in Simpsons, although it's on the other side of the road in his time. And this is before Sherlock Holmes, obviously. And that's the menagerie that Jane Austen should have, probably did. But look at how closed in the elephant is and the lion is too. Awful experience. This is the theatre. and we're now here. So this is where all the theatres were in this area here, and then up into Drury Lane, up this way, and St Martin's Lane. And that shows us St James's Park and St James's Park. And I've hurried us along a bit, or else we're never going to get anywhere. And I've got to finish very shortly. Um, and that's the Admiralty. And they had a semaphore system all the way from here to Deal, 15 chains to take you down to the channel. Took a message 60 seconds to get there. And this is where the two sailor brothers would have come to get their commissions. Admiralty, which is in Westminster. Sir Thomas Bartram is a member of Parliament in Mansfield Park, and Walter Elliot is also involved, comes here. And Dr. Grant is appointed to a position in the Abbey in Mansfield Park. Westminster Bridge is just near it, the second bridge built in London. And shopping malls became famous. This one was actually built in 1820, but shopping malls were built in the 18th century, and Jane would have shopped in them. She definitely went to this theatre, but in those days it was called the Little Theatre, and this is where she saw the play, which is in Mansfield Park, and the theatre looked like that at that time. This is Leicester Square, where she could see a medical collection of specimens, where there was a panorama, and where she could see the invisible woman who lived in a glass carboy. And if you doubted her, you put your hand in, and she blew on your hand and spoke to you, so you knew she was real. So we're now up here. This is the palace of the Prince Regent, where the librarian sent the letter to Jane Austen, whether she would let him sponsor her book, dedicate her book to him. And this is the Prince Regent. That's the Prince Regent in one of these scurrilous cartoons. There he is, his friends. They're all either vomiting or need to vomit or need to get dressed anyway. And that's the sort of a public view of what the Prince Regent was like. This is George III, who had a more, he was the one who went mad or suffered from what people thought was madness. And he was sort of lampooned as being a farmer, Farmer George and his wife. This is the Prince Regent's heir, who died after 50 hours of in childbirth. And Jane Austen believed that men treated women as breeding sows, and she knew two women who had 14 children. One of her sisters-in-law, I think two of her sisters-in-laws had 14 children, but I wouldn't swear to two, but definitely one. But she definitely knew two people who had 14 children. That's Grand Old Duke of York on top of his column, near where Prince Regent spent a fortune building his palace, which looked like that, or like that. And that's the dedication in Emma to His Royal Highness the Prince Regent. This work is by His Royal Highness's permission most respectfully dedicated to His Royal Highness, beautiful and obedient and humble servant, the author, Jane Austen. Great honour, and he liked her books, but she didn't like him. So Jane could go to art galleries, like as we know she did. Here's people looking. Look how crowded that is. Look how crowded the paintings are in those days. And the guide of 1809 shows you every single painter. Well, not every single painter, but Henry Fuseli, Robert Smike. Anyway, you'll recognize some of them. Benjamin West, who was American, Mr. Wilkie. So some famous paintings mentioned in the book. So you could go and get a painting when you came to London. This is a painting of what you might, well, these are famous women. So it's a very advanced painting because they were all novelists or painters or playwrights or critics or singers or linguists or poets, or Angelica Kauffman, who's a painter, of course, who didn't paint this painting. This is Joshua Reynolds, who was the most famous painter at the time, and this is a joke based upon one of his paintings, which I found this somewhere during COVID. And that takes us to St James's Square, where Warren Hastings lived, and it's also where Ada Lovelace lived, the daughter of Byron, who was a favourite of Jane Austen. And it's also where the Wedgwood showroom, which you had to pay to go in, this is Wedgwood on the right, and Jane Austen went with her rich brother Edward to buy this set of Wedgwood to use in his two stately homes. And that's the famous, well, that's not the famous, that's the rich brother of Jane Austen. And that brings us to where Edward Ferrars is living. And that brings us to, yeah, that's Pall Mall. That's Pall Mall, where there was a famous haberdashery that Jane Austen almost certainly visited. And then that takes us to give us an idea of what's going on in Pall Mall. That's St James's Palace, where there are lots of coffee houses. And this has been a shop since Jane Austen's day, as a grocer's shop. It now specializes in wine, but it was a grocer's shop, and famous people used to weigh themselves on that scale, including the Duke of Wellington. This is a famous hat shop, and this is a famous shoe shop where famous people like the Duke of Wellington had their feet measured and had wooden copies of them, which are called lasts, and they've got a wonderful collection of rich people's wooden feet upstairs. Lots of gentlemen's clubs, and the most famous, that's Carlton Club, that's, and is we're going up St James's Street at the moment. This is where the Almanac was, which is a very famous club where rich people met rich people and got married. This is Beau Brummel over here on the left. And that's been there since Jane Austen's day. This sells you razors and shaving brushes. Going further up the street, which is another gentleman's club, and then the most famous of them all, that's Boodles on the right, and the most famous of this is where Colonel Brandon lives in this street, and that's White's, the most famous gentleman's club, where Henry, Jane Austen's brother, went to a party with the King of France and the Tsar of all Russias at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. It was one of the big things that the Austens really were proud of. And people used to play cards a lot in those days. There's a gun shop there now. And there are lots of famous shops which used to be there in Jane Austen's day. So I'm just going to go, that's Cheese Shop. This is Beau Brummel. And that's a Darcy-like looking man. And these are a couple of fops walking around. I love the way the dog resembles the rather too tight trousered and too neat soldier. That's Dad saying, your son has debauched my daughter. Another shopping arcade, that's the Burlington Arcade. Jane Austen came here. Gun shop, dancing academy, which James Austen would have. And his sheep going through near the British Museum. Fortnum and Masons, Hatchards, both been there since Jane Austen's day. Fortnum and Masons, Royal Academy, where all these artists were. And these are other places you could go. Loads of museums on this street. This is an Egyptian museum, a natural history museum. This is a wonderful museum, this one. Wonderful picture of a natural history museum in this street. Then Jane Austen would have loved this. This was after her death, sadly, but this was a gallery full of portraits of famous people embroidered by Mary Linwood. And in Jane Austen's day, there were panoramas, and you would go to this amazingly tall building, and then you would see a panorama of London, or a panorama of Edinburgh, or a panorama of the Bay of Naples, or the panorama of Venice or Rome or whatever. And it's virtual reality. You have this huge building with this huge circular painting around it, and you could walk around and examine or be guided as to what you're seeing. And then at a certain time of the day, Vesuvius would explode with a firework display. I don't think I've got that picture, but I have got a slide of that somewhere. I'm going to finish very shortly, but where are we at the moment? We're looking at important places, and these are performance places. and but that's by Thomas Rowlandson. That was off Oxford Street. Caricatures, and we're going. This is the interior of. There's a big party inside the Whites, and then they put this huge pavilion for peace in St James's Park, and the Temple of Concord in. I thought it was Green Park, but my Hyde Park to celebrate the end of the war. Jane, these are places that well, that's where that this is where Jane Austen's books were published. This was her publisher, um, John Murray, and that's an advert for Northanger Abbey. Persuasion mentions Pride and Prejudice and Mansfield Park. Sense and Sensibility by a lady. The front page of Pride and Prejudice. Some accounts of how much money she might have made. Jane Austen's niece at a writing desk with a silhouette of which may be Cassandra. Jane Austen's writing table. Jane Austen's handwriting on a letter which is done in two directions to save paper. Another shopping arcade, the Royal Institution, which we mentioned earlier on, with this wonderful lecture hall, Humphrey Davy, the British Institution with its painting collection, Anne Lister, after Jane Austen's time, but a famous diarist who wrote a lesbian diary. Berkeley Street, where Henry lived. Grafton Street, where Jane Austen went shopping there with Manon, Henry's French servant, and that's the interior of Grafton's. Fashionable winter dress for women. And this is from Sense and Sensibility, just telling us how restless Mary Ann was and how tedious Mrs. Palmer was. These are the loungers, the men who went there just to look at pretty women, like Walter Scott, Prince Regent, Byron, Lord, anyway, and Beau Brummel. These are the set of people buying ice cream in the streets of London, and they would have some people would be boycotting the ice cream because of the sugar, the anti-saccharides. These are various shops. That one was the very famous chemist's shop. This is Willoughby in this street that we're on at the moment, which is Bond Street. And we're looking down Bond Street there, New Bond Street, Old Bond Street. And then we're looking down Burlington Arcade, which looks like that nowadays. And then we're going across to Cork Street, where she said, "Here I am once more in this scene of dissipation and vice. I begin already to find my morals corrupted." Royal Academy. That's Henry's house. That's the Albany where he had his bank. And this is Sackville Street, where Robert Ferris buys a toothpick case, much to the irritation of Eleanor and Marianne. Which brings us to here, which I'm not going to go through. We've seen that one already. This is a satire on the size of women's hats because they mustn't get brown, so their hats became more and more peaked. This is Albany, and to the left, Henry had his bank. Now Henry went bankrupt, and Jane Austen lost £10. The rich brother, I think, lost £20,000, and he became a curate and much chastened, I think he was. And as I said, Jane Austen left him money in her will because she knew he was the one of her family who needed it more than anybody else. Anyway, so I'm going to finish there because I've gone on far, far, far too long. I thought I'd spent quite a time cutting that down by not doing Sense and Sensibility at the beginning. So if you've stayed, I think you get a gold star. And if you didn't stay and you're listening to the recording, well done for getting as far as you did. Anyway, so thank you very, very much. I will be in contact, as I said, in the next few days. And if you've got anything you want to say, you can put it in the. I apologise, but I have to go. Thank you for the talk, says Helena. Put it in the chat. Um, I'll keep this on for a moment and then shut it down. And but what am I going to say? So yeah, so I'm doing. If you look at London Walks, you'll see I'm doing Jane Austen in Bath. I think it's on February the 10th, and on Thursday I'm doing this rather wonderful tour of the Civil War restoration, and it's a very compelling story. Um, so thank you very, very much. Really, you do get awards for hanging on in there. So that's most of you, I think. Brilliant. So thank you very much. Yeah, that is most of you. Well done. Fantastic. Sorry to be so long, but I hope you enjoyed it. That's the main thing, that you enjoyed it. And if you didn't, you could have left. I don't mean that cynically. I just mean because I've recorded it. Anyway, so I'm going to stop waffling and let you get away and do whatever you want to do next. So anyway, hope to see you again. And do remember to have a look at my blog, which I will give you the address of in my follow-up letter. But basically, if you look at Kevin Flood, Flude, you'll find I'm the only one, really. Um, I loved your presentation. Already booked JA in Bath. I could stay for slide 415. Oh my God, there wasn't 414, were there? And not been tired. Thank you, says Andrea. Andrea. Karen says thank you. So thank you very, very much for that. I appreciate it. And I will shut things down. I'm going to walk away and then I'll shut things down. So any other comments, you can send them to me in reply to the email. I will send you my email in the reply. So thank you very, very much. Right then, so I'm going to close it down and I'm going to stop the recording first, which is somewhere up here. More. Stop